Hi everyone, I'm Lizzy Allen from Thimble and Thread Quilting. I'm a Grace Ambassador and a National Educator, and I live in Victoria, Australia. And today we're going to do a fun creative little class on creating feathers. So thank you for joining me, and let's start. In this class I'm going to cover 4 or 5 different methods of quilting feathers. As long arm quilters, we sort of feel that the moment we can quilt a perfect, beautiful feather, that we've climbed Mount Everest, we've reached the top. Now, there's several different ways to quilt these feathers. None of them are right or wrong. You will find your preferred method, and hopefully I can show you some of the methods that I started when I was beginning to achieve great feathers. So I'm going to start off with some paper and we're going to draw them. This is a key element to learning how to quilt feathers. For me, even before I start quilting on a big quilt, I will sit down and draw the feather for a couple of different reasons. They all talk about muscle memory, the way to go about it. For me, it gives me direction and confidence that I know which way I'm traveling, what's the preferred way for this particular quilt for me to quilt. So I'm going to get down, and first of all I'm going to show you drawing 3 or 4 different ones, and then how we take that, we've got the muscle memory, and we'll go over to my machine, which is not in the video, so I'll just move up. So this is Grace. She is my Unique Pro 21. We are best friends. Love her to the moon and back. So hopefully when I quilt on the machine, they'll be nice and clear and help you on your journey to creating fun and stunning feathers that are to die for. So let's get started. Okay, so I've got my piece of paper and I've just got a black marker, and I'm going to draw what is known as the traditional feather. Now, I can actually quilt better than I can draw, so just stay with me. Now, the traditional feather is what we call a backtrack feather. So what we essentially did was we quilted the spine, so we just have a curve. Then we put a teardrop actually on the top. And then what we were to do is backtrack back down the spine. And then I like to refer to this as like a half a heart. It's a teardrop again, and basically you would draw half the heart, and then you would backtrack back on that feather and come in, back to the spine, in, travel further down, backtrack and around. And the idea of drawing is you want to draw it the way you would quilt it. So essentially, you don't really lift the pen up. You want to get that fluid movement. So it's up and back, up and back. And these were traditionally found on a lot of the older quilts that are out there, and you'll notice that they're quite thin and elongated. So we travel and then we go back. Now, some quilters can come over to the left-hand side and start going in the reverse. So you travel back down, and just move the paper so you can see a little bit better. So travel back, and you've got to bring yourself down, make sure that you connect to this spine, and travel, and travel, and travel. Okay. And you're down at the bottom. One of the other ways of doing it is simply quilt your spine with the teardrop on top. Then travel back down to the bottom so you'd be traveling back down in this direction, and then you would do the same thing, so you're backtracking. They get very short. And when you are up the top, a lot of quilters would travel back down to this position and do the same thing, backtracking. And what that means is that you end up with 3 rows of stitching on the spine, so it can look thread heavy. Some people will actually quilt in the opposite direction, so they will start here at the top, quilt their spine so they're at the bottom, and then start their backtrack feather. Get to the top and actually place their, I call this the teardrop at the top, and then travel back down. Okay, and then start the feather. One of the other things that you can do if you plan to echo is start here at the top, do your spine, travel down, do the right hand side of the plume of the feather, and then after you've done your tier here, instead of traveling back down the spine if you're not confident, you can actually sneak out and echo your way back to the bottom. And it's great because our quilting feet are 1/4 inch, so using your foot as a guide, you just literally echo back. Then you're down at the bottom again, and you can do the left hand side of the plume. Then of course, do exactly the same thing, sneak your way out and echo back down to the bottom position. So when I started and I was really, really nervous and I just wanted to do feathers, one of the things that I did to help myself was I started at the top and I did my spine, came down. And what I did is, just to get the motion, I literally quilted just the plume. And what you'll see is this is not a backtrack feather. So it was okay because none of them were backtracked. So and then it gave me that fudge factor. So if everything's the same, it looks like I've done it deliberately. I don't actually have to worry about the fact that I wasn't backtracking, and then I would travel back down to the bottom and do the same thing. And when they're all put together, they do look okay. I'm really happy with it because it's uniform. So I'll just flip over. To get the motion in my head and to decide how I was going to do this, we usually have mastered the pebble and the curlicue. So what I did is I'd start at the top and I'd create the spine and I'd come down. And this is what I called the hook feather. So what it was is I could go hook, back, hook, back. And what this did is this taught me to stop at the tip of the top of the plume here, but also to travel back to the spine here and connect. And then what I did is I just keep traveling up to create that hook feather. It was just a little bit more forgiving. And then to make it more interesting, because I was so nervous about backtracking back down this spine, because this was a double line hook, I would do my hook at the top, which would be normally my teardrop, and I'd come in, and what I'd do is as I travelled back down, using my foot as a guide, I did a double spine. So there was no backtracking. Now I'm back at the bottom and I can once again do my hook feather. And you know, it's perfectly okay if I didn't want to echo to stop in this position. Just lock off those threads and bury them later. So that's what we traditionally call a fancy feather. It's a hook feather. It's not what we would normally call a traditional backtrack feather, which, and then do mine. Now, it's taken me years to decide to be able to go up the right hand side and down the left. It's all part of our journey in learning that muscle memory. Now, the other one that I want to show you is what a lot of people call the hump and bump feather. And this has become one of my favorites because it's very hard to when you have a border that's actually quite large. When you do this traditional feather with the plume and it's a backtrack, it's very hard to travel all the way out and then travel all the way perfectly backtracking when they're very long plumes. So this is the fun thing about this new method that I'll show you, which is what we call the hump and bump feather. So basically, once again, I'm going to start at the top and I'm going to draw a spine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the red pen and draw some registration lines where I want this feather to come out to. So I'm down here at the bottom, and once again I have to create that half heart. So I'm going to go up and travel and come back, and I've created the first plume, and it's much easier to travel that far and out. And then what I do is you sneak back up the spine, but this is the hump. And then what I'm going to do is I'm only going to backtrack to the top of the plume and come in and create another one. And this is why we call it the hump. So then I travel up, create the hump, travel back and in. And you can see I can really bring this plume out, especially on a wide border. So that's a hump back, and then basically it's entirely up to you whether you travel back down the spine and push yourself out. So naturally I need that half heart and then hump back. And you can actually see that these have got quite fat. So when you want a custom quilted border and it's a 6.5, 7 inch border, these are really, really easy to push out. But I'm going to go over to the machine now and I'm going to show you how I stitch some of these out, and I'm going to show you how we do them, how I break them up in borders, because giving ourselves some registration lines and what I call cheaters, so my brain will see those and help me intersect what I actually need to do. So let's go over to the machine and stitch out some fun feathers. Okay, so the first feather I'm going to show you is what I call the hook feather. So I'm just going to come up here and just do a nice gentle curve to start off with, lock those stitches off. And then what we're going to do is we're going to travel down the spine and we're going to create our first hook. get to the top, I'm just going to put a nice little hook in the top. Travel back down and lock those threads off. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just sneak across here and I'm just going to draw, and we'll do what they call the traditional feather. So let's lock those off. Now once again I'm going to start at the top of the feather, and I'm going to just trim those, come down. Now remember, the traditional feather is what we refer to as the backtrack, and so a lot of people found it really hard to travel out. So of course we start out with our first plume, half feather, half heart, whatever you want to call it. So here we are. And then we have to backtrack up that spine. Over to the top. Travel back down, and of course come through to the other side. Now it's really interesting. So if you get to this point and you think, well, if I travel back round and I'm going to end up with a space in here, one of the fun ways of filling it is to do this. And of course, just lock those threads off and trim them. And if you prefer to bury your threads, which is what I like to do, that's perfectly okay. Now let's stitch out a hump and bump. So we'll just draw a nice little area with the spine. Okay. Alright, so locked those off. Well, I think I just cut my needle thread. No? Okay. Alright, here we go. So, doing the spine. Then our first half heart. Travelling up. Doing our hump. Our bump. Travelling up the spine. Hump. Bump. Travelling. Hump. Bump. Back down our spine. Our first half heart. Bump. Now you just saw it is easier with the hump and bump to bring them back down into this area. And then of course put my little teardrop and it's finished. And just trim those. So now you know why a lot of people really, the hump and bump became so popular, Now what we're going to do is we're going to do a border hump and bump. So this is our border hump and pump, and I have drawn some registration lines just so that it gives me an idea, and it should also actually help you guys. So of course the first thing I want to do is I'm going to start down here, and this is if I was going to do it like a continuous border right round a quilt. So here we go. So of course I'm going to do the spine. Now I've reached my center point, so at this point is where I put my tiering, and then I can start my hump and bump. Now I want to be respectful of that junction. Okay, so I've done that. Now I'm going to come up, do my feather, and I've drawn my 45, and this will help me go around the corner. So just travel on. Now really ideally I should have travelled further down the hump to create a much nicer bump there. Of course, at this point, I'd travel just back, lock off those stitches, and go back to the center and do the other side of it. And when you're doing a big border on the quilt, it is worthwhile stopping and starting and locking them off, especially if you don't want your spine to look really, really thread heavy. So here we go, we'll do our So you can see that I've stopped the feathers at that junction point, that registration. So up, in, I'll just hopefully you can see I did a better job here because I travelled further round the point, and that so when I did it up the top there, I didn't come round far enough in this direction. And it's something that we learn over time to just keep trying. So I bring it round to that junction, hump. Makes for a much nicer feather. So that's the first one that we do, showing you the 45 corner. And This is great. This is what I'd predominantly do on a quilt that I really didn't want to turn the borders. I would just literally do my feathers as I went along. And of course, here's the junction in the centre. So naturally I'd come down to this end and once again start. My tier, start my first hump, bump. See, this is much better than over here. It's never ever be frightened to warm up before you start a quilt. So in the morning, if you want to do feather borders, just pop a bit of scrap on, get your muscle movement and your mojo in, and honestly, they'll start to be the easiest things that you ever do. Okay, so I'll just move that out the way. And let's see if you can get it. So you can see, so that's just the hump bump feather. It's really, really quite fast. So let's have some fun, and I'll show you some sashings. Okay, so this is a great one for a very wide border when you think, oh, I'm not going to be good enough to fill it completely with feathers. It also adds reference and interest to our quilt. So I'm going to use some of my budget circles and ovals, and I'll just show you how I would create a quick little swag. So here we go. So I'm just gently guiding the ruler, the foot of the machine against the ruler. There's no pressure at all. You don't have to bear down, just be relaxed. And then I'm just going to gently go back. And now I'm going to create a feather because I want to go in a continuous line. I would swag right across the top of the quilt, and I'd do all the feathers at once. So I can even use this as a spine, or I can just simply have a little fun, maybe put a nice curl in there, double spine, and so this is a hump and bump. Travel back down, and of course do the other side. Travel back down, and then all I do is, using my ruler, because I probably wouldn't have ditched this line, and this is how I would ditch it to go to the next position. So I've now ditched the top of my sashing, so I'm really, really happy. Now let's do sort of, some people don't like doing double-sided feathers, so you could do, I'll get a smaller oval. We can do just a single-sided feather. So then I'm just going to travel up. Okay, and then basically, instead of double-sided, I'm just going to do it single. So once again, hump and bump. Okay, so once again, like a border feather, this time I'm going to show you how to do both sides of the spine or even a double spine. It's not right, it's not wrong. It's the wonderful thing about being quilters and about being creative. So I can start here, and this will be basically a backtrack feather. So instead of stopping and starting and coming back and travelling the spine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work my way up each side of the spine. Of course, I lost my mojo then and went straight into a backtrack. But that's actually okay too, because I will show you can backtrack both sides. So hump. That's your hump. That's your bump. And then travel. So that's doing both sides of the feather without having to backtrack on the spine, which I don't mind doing. It just depends on my mojo that day. Now what I'm going to do is I'll do sort of like what they call whimsical, fanciful. So the one thing about this is there's really no backtracking because there's no rhyme, no reason. If you don't travel back and forth up the spine, it doesn't matter. So curly and maybe a feather. Oh, it's not a feather. It's supposed to be a heart. And I'm looking here and I've got a little bit of space, so the great thing is there's nothing that says I can't come in. You just pop a little feather in there with, say, a spine. Maybe another curl there. Now you can see because there's no rhyme, no reason. I have no backtracking on these feathers. And because there's a gap between everything, it doesn't matter if that gap is not exactly the same or perfect, because all we're doing is we're just adding reference and style and design to our quilt top surface. So that's that one. And of course, when I come around here, you see, started out traditional, backtracking, lost the plot and went into hump and bump feathers and turned the corner. So okay, so feathers are quite wonderful in that we can make them fit all sorts of shapes. So I've done a couple of triangles, say we were doing triangle borders, and what I'm going to do is put a whimsical feather in and background fill it and see what you think of that. So here we go. So do it traditional curl right up here into the point. Plume. Then I'm going to come another direction. Plume. And then I would simply just travel back down the spine. And if I was doing this in a border, once again, I would then travel across that edge to the next position that I wanted to start. Now in this one, what I'm going to do is I'll put a feather in, but I'll make the feather small and we'll pop a bit of background in it. And you know, some people say, oh, that's way too busy. This is where you get to be creative. You can have the choice of what you would like. So this is just our traditional backtrack feather. And this is where I'd probably just sneak down and into the next one. Now, if this was on a border, one of the nice things to do is to fill in that space would be to just piano stop. So you can see that that's just a little piano key border and it's really, really quite fast. So I'm just going to do a little circle feather. So once again, just my little budget 1/4 inch Perspex templates. So just move my hand. And I'm just going to draw myself a circle in here, and I'm going to do something different. So I'm going to draw a circle here on the outer to where I have to go to, but I'm going to do this side square so that you can see if I was putting a round wreath inside a square how I would fill it out. And this will be a hump and bump. So here we go. So round. traveling further around the round, and that's enabling me to go around the circle wreath. And so this side is where I'm pretending that it's a round wreath in a square. So now I need to push my feathers out to that square. Thread out the way. I should have snipped that off. Coming into the inside. Okay, so that's our feather wreath. And just move. And you can see, so up the top here I push the feathers out, and on this side they were around. So that's how we do a hump and bump feather wreath. Okay, so this is what they call the crawling feather. So what I've done is basically just drawn a rectangle and some curls, and I'm going to show you how I would do it to fill this space. So first thing I need to do, of course, is the spine. So here we go. So now, it's important for me, when I come back to this point here, I actually put in my teardrop or my light bulb, whatever I want to call it. Just pop it in there. Pop the curve in, travel back, pop the bulb in. Now I'm just going to pop some registrations in because I need to basically tell myself, because the feather's going to come round and I need to make sure that I can get feathers on both sides. So this just sort of helps me a little. So now I have to travel back to the beginning so I can start. And then of course I will travel back. And that's what a lot of people don't like about this, is the constant travelling. Now, choice of thread is a big thing. So if I was using super fine thread, you wouldn't notice it so much. So I'm okay with it. Most of the time I would block off the threads because I would be doing this over a really large area, and so it wouldn't matter about the amounts of stops and starts. So round we go. Move that thread out the way. So that's what they call a crawling feather. Let's just see if you can see that. It does look a lot better if I remove the blue water soluble pen. I'll just trim that thread. So you can see there's a lot of backtracking, and it's not my ideal. I would stop and start, but I do love the fact that it's free and it just fills in like a huge amount of space. So it's quite a fun feather to do. So this is just a little feather, whimsical, modern, that I'm just going to fill the space and show you what it looks like after I do the feather and put some background fill in and see what it looks like. tuck into there, and then just sneak out, and we could do just a really nice background fill. Some curls and some pebbles. So you saw how quickly that is. It's just a fun little feather that, you know, you do that all over a quilt. None of them have to be the same, no rhyme, no reason. And it's just a little bit of fun to do. And it takes very little time at all. One of the fun things to do when we first start out and we're trying to get that muscle memory is we can use things like stencils. It really, really helps us get the motion and style. It's also a fun way to cheat to do a background fill. So this is a stencil and this is my quilt pounce pad, and they're full of chalk and they're easy. I just simply rub it on the surface. And when I just move my machine over, when I take it off, hopefully you guys can see it, I've got my stencil. Now, one of the first things you want to do is trace it with your finger. So in actual fact, the stencil starts down here. So this is about getting the muscle memory and tracing and drawing. I'm actually going to trace that so that I know which direction I need my brain. I've actually told my brain where I want to go. But we're going to have some fun. Instead of just stitching this out the normal way, like following the line, we're going to put curls in it and other little feathers, because we can keep registration and be geometrically correct, because in essence we're following the line. So here we go. Just bring up that bobbin thread, lock it off, and away we go. So follow those first couple of feathers. This is my first one, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a curl instead of another feather. Travel down, put another curl, travel down, and this one I might do a double spine. It's a really fun way to be creative, and of course, if you make a mistake, it really doesn't matter, because in a minute the chalk's going to be gone. as you can see, it's a fun way of creating our own design from something that was really quite plain to begin with, and we've just zhushed it up. And for a beginner, it's a fabulous way to start getting the idea of what we want to do. So this is just a little bit at the end just to show you how I did. So this was a scalloped border on a quilt, and I just popped some fun fancy feathers there, and then I'll just come across and show you. So here's some that I did in the swag. Now none of them are the same, and that's what I love, because no rhyme, no reason, and it just made the quilt top just a little bit more fun. So just show you that. And now I'll show you some formal feathers. Okay, so you can see I had a little bit of fun here. I created a bubble at the end and a double spine. And these are backtrack feathers, so they're not hump and bump. So different space, different design, but they all work. And then, of course, I popped some in here, and I kept the design flowing by putting this beautiful big bubble at the end instead of a teardrop. And then I'll just show you the centre there. So that shows you another way of filling the circle rather than just the traditional. These are the last feathers I'm going to show you. These are backtrack feathers, and they're more Victorian in style. And because this was a vintage cloth that I turned into a quilt, I sort of wanted to keep the tradition of doing the traditional backtrack feather. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope that you take the time to have the fun to create your own style of fantastic quilting feathers. I'd just like to take the time to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video on creating feathers. It's such a big subject, and there's so many different wonderful creative ways that we can do feathers. There's not a right, there's not a wrong. All our brains work differently, but I hope it takes some of the myth out of it and it inspires you to create your own. Don't forget to draw, create your own design books for your borders and for your quilt sashings, and enjoy your quilting. So hopefully I'll see you again soon.